My name is Clara Bennett, and I was 31 years old the day my younger brother threw me out of our father's funeral. I had flown from Seattle to Charleston after getting a cold voicemail from my mother. "Your father passed this morning. The service is Friday." That was all she said. "No, I'm sorry. No, he wanted to see you. Just a date and a location." When I arrived at St. Matthew's Chapel wearing a black coat and carrying white lilies, my brother Ethan blocked the church entrance before I could even step inside. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here," he said loudly enough for people nearby to hear. I stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" His jaw tightened. "Dad changed his will before he died. He knew exactly who you were." Then Ethan pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and shoved it against my chest. A legal notice. Trespassing warning. Signed by my own mother. "You're not family anymore," he whispered. People were staring now. Whispering. Judging. I looked past him into the chapel and saw my mother sitting in the front row beside the casket. She never looked up, so I left quietly. I placed my flowers down on the church step, then walked back to my rental car without another word. But before I drove away, I mailed one final envelope. A plain brown envelope addressed to Ethan. Inside it was a single photograph. And 3 pages that would destroy everything my family thought they knew about our father. 3 hours later, during the funeral reception, my brother opened it in front of more than 200 guests. By the end of the night, 2 people had walked out in tears. 1 marriage ended. And my mother stopped speaking for nearly 6 months. But before I tell you what was inside that envelope, take a second to like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Because to understand why that envelope shattered my family forever, you need to understand what kind of daughter I was raised to be. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a white waterfront house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. My father, Richard Bennett, owned one of the largest architecture firms in the state. My mother hosted charity galas. Our family appeared in society columns. From the outside, we looked perfect. Inside that house, there were only 2 roles, the golden child and the disappointment. Ethan was the golden child. Always. Even though he was younger by 4 years, the entire family revolved around him. His soccer games mattered, his grades mattered, his opinions mattered. I learned very early that mine didn't. At 12 years old, I won a statewide writing competition. First place, out of thousands of students. The ceremony was held downtown at the Charleston Public Library. I wore a navy dress and spent hours practicing my acceptance speech in the mirror. Dad promised he'd come. So did Mom. I remember standing backstage clutching the small note cards in my hands while other kids sat with proud parents in the audience. I kept scanning the room looking for mine. They never came. Halfway through the ceremony, I finally understood they weren't coming at all. When I got home later that night, carrying my trophy, the house was dark except for the kitchen light. My father and Ethan were sitting at the table eating takeout pizza. "Where were you?" I asked quietly. Dad looked confused for a second. Then he snapped his fingers. "Oh right, your school thing." My throat tightened. "I won." "That's great, sweetheart." He barely looked up from the television. Ethan rolled his eyes. "Can we not make a huge deal about some writing contest?" I stood there holding that trophy while something inside me quietly cracked. But then my grandmother spoke. Grandma Rose lived in the small guest house behind our property. She was my father's mother. Elegant, sharp, the only person in the family who ever seemed to truly see me. Later that night, she knocked softly on my bedroom door. "I heard my granddaughter became a champion today." I tried not to cry. She sat beside me and handed me a leather journal. Real leather. My initials pressed into the cover in gold. "Write everything down," she whispered. "One day the truth will matter more than people realize." At the time, I thought she meant writing stories. I didn't know she meant our family. From that day on, I wrote constantly, every memory, every argument, every broken promise. It became my escape. And eventually, my future. Years later, I earned a scholarship to Columbia University for journalism. I thought maybe this time my parents would finally be proud. The acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I ran downstairs trembling with excitement. "I got in," I said breathlessly. Columbia gave me a full scholarship. My mother smiled politely. That's nice. Nice. My father barely reacted at all. You know, journalism doesn't make money, right? Ethan laughed from the couch. Maybe she'll write celebrity gossip or something. I stood there waiting for someone to care. Nobody did. Except Grandma Rose. That night she opened a bottle of champagne herself. To the smartest Bennett in 3 generations, she declared. My father rolled his eyes, but she didn't care. And neither did I. At least not anymore. I left for New York 2 months later. No tears. No dramatic goodbye. My mother hugged me stiffly at the airport. Dad shook my hand like I was a business client. Ethan didn't come. And for the next decade, I built my life without them. I became an investigative journalist. At first I covered small local stories, then corruption, corporate fraud, political scandals. Eventually my articles started winning awards. My name appeared in national magazines. I published a best-selling nonfiction book at 29. Still, my family rarely called. When they did, the conversations always revolved around Ethan. Ethan got engaged. Ethan bought a new house. Ethan joined Dad's firm. Ethan this, Ethan that. Meanwhile, they spoke about my career like it was a strange little hobby. One Christmas, my father introduced me to his business partner by saying, "This is Clara. She writes articles online." Articles online. I had just won a National Press Award 2 weeks earlier. I stopped correcting him after that. Then Grandma Rose died. And everything changed. I got the call while sitting in a hotel room in Chicago. Heart failure. Peaceful. Gone before sunrise. I flew to Charleston immediately. The funeral was held in the same chapel where years later I would be thrown out myself. Funny how life circles back like that. After the service, an attorney approached me quietly. "Miss Bennett, your grandmother requested a private meeting after the burial." My stomach tightened. Inside a small office behind the chapel, the attorney handed me a sealed box and several legal documents. The first document nearly made me drop it. Grandma Rose had left me her entire private estate. Not Ethan, not my father, me. Her historic waterfront property, investment accounts, jewelry, everything. Over $4 million in assets. My hands shook while I read her letter. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then I am finally free from this exhausting family. I know what they think of you because I watched them teach you to shrink yourself your entire life. But I also watched you survive it. Ethan inherited attention. You inherited strength. That matters more. There is something else you must know. Your father is hiding truths that will eventually destroy this family if they remain buried. When the time comes, trust your instincts. And remember this, the people who dismiss you often fear what happens when you finally stop seeking their approval." I read the letter 3 times. Then I cried harder than I had at the funeral, because for the first time in my life, someone had chosen me first. I kept Grandma Rose's letter hidden for years, and I would have kept it hidden forever if my father hadn't died. 2 years after Grandma's funeral, I got the voicemail from my mother. "Your father passed this morning. The service is Friday." No emotion, no warmth, just logistics. I almost didn't go, but despite everything, he was still my father. So I booked the flight. On the plane to Charleston, memories kept replaying in my head. Dad teaching Ethan to sail while I watched from the dock. Dad missing every one of my award ceremonies. Dad telling relatives Ethan would carry on the family legacy. I wondered if death changed things, if maybe somewhere near the end he regretted any of it. Part of me hoped he did. Part of me hated myself for still hoping. When I landed in Charleston, the city felt exactly the same. Humid air, saltwater breeze, beautiful old homes hiding ugly secrets. The funeral was scheduled for noon the next day. I arrived early carrying white lilies because despite everything, my father loved lilies. Or maybe I just wanted one final gesture that proved I was better than the bitterness this family planted in me. Then Ethan stopped me at the church doors. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here." Everything after that happened exactly the way I told you. The trespassing notice, my mother refusing to look at me, the humiliation, the whispers. But there's something I haven't told you yet. Something important. 3 weeks before my father died, he called me, for the first time in almost a year. I nearly didn't answer. His voice sounded weak, older. "Clara," he said quietly, "I need to see you." I remember gripping the phone tighter. "What's wrong?" Long silence. Then, "I made mistakes." Those 4 words shocked me more than anything else he could have said. We agreed to meet at a small marina outside Charleston, the same marina where he used to take Ethan sailing. When I arrived, he looked thinner than I remembered. Tired, like something heavy had finally caught up to him. We sat facing the water for almost 20 minutes before he spoke again. "There are things you don't know about this family." I laughed bitterly. "That makes 2 of us." But he didn't smile. Instead, he handed me a folder. Inside were financial records, property transfers, bank statements, and one document that changed everything: a paternity test. Negative. Ethan Bennett was not my father's biological son. I stared at the paper in disbelief. "What is this?" My father rubbed his face slowly. "Your mother had an affair 30 years ago." I couldn't breathe. She begged me to stay, said nobody could ever know. By then, Ethan was already born. "Does Ethan know?" "No. And you stayed anyway?" His eyes filled with tears. "I loved him. I raised him. But after a while, your mother started treating me like the outsider in my own home." I sat frozen. Years suddenly rearranged themselves inside my mind. The favoritism, the guilt, the way my mother worshipped Ethan, the way Dad slowly withdrew from the family over time. "I wanted to tell you years ago," he whispered. "But I was ashamed." "Why tell me now?" His answer came quietly. "Because you were the only honest thing in my life." I didn't know what to say to that. Before we left, he handed me one more envelope. "If something happens to me, read this carefully." I never opened it. Not until after he died. And not until after Ethan threw me out of the funeral. That was the envelope I mailed to him before leaving the church parking lot. The one he opened during the reception. Inside was the paternity test. Copies of financial documents proving my mother had secretly moved money into accounts under Ethan's name for years. And my father's final handwritten confession. By the time Ethan opened it in front of 200 guests, the damage had already begun. According to several people who later described the scene to me, Ethan initially laughed when he saw my envelope. "Probably some dramatic nonsense," he reportedly said. My mother was standing beside him holding a champagne glass. Guests gathered around, casually expecting entertainment. Then Ethan unfolded the first document. His smile disappeared instantly. "What the hell is this?" My mother went pale before he even spoke again. "Mom?" She tried reaching for the papers. He pulled away. "What is this?" People nearby started noticing the tension. The room quieted. Then Ethan read the paternity test. And everything exploded. "You lied to me?" he shouted. My mother burst into tears immediately. Guests stared in stunned silence. One woman actually dropped her wine glass. Ethan kept flipping through the documents faster and faster. Financial transfers, secret accounts, letters. Then he reached my father's confession. Witnesses later said his hands started shaking so violently he could barely hold the pages. Marcus Hale, my father's law partner, later told me the entire room felt frozen. Like everyone suddenly realized they were watching a family collapse in real time. "What did you do?" Ethan screamed at my mother. She kept crying. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Not supposed to happen like this. As if the problem was exposure instead of the lie itself. One guest quietly walked out. Then another. The reception dissolved into chaos. And somewhere in the middle of it all, my father's carefully buried truth finally surfaced. My phone started ringing before I even boarded my flight back to Seattle. Ethan called 7 times. My mother called 14. I answered neither. Then came the voicemails. "How long did you know? You destroyed this family. Call me back. You had no right." No right. Funny. After 31 years of silence, suddenly everyone cared what I had to say. But I was done performing emotional labor for people who never protected me. At the airport, I finally listened to one voicemail completely. It was Ethan. But he sounded different now. Not angry, broken. "Clara, please just tell me if Dad knew for sure. Please." I closed my eyes. Because beneath all the cruelty, Ethan had been lied to too. His entire identity shattered in a single moment. Still, I didn't call back. Not yet. During the flight home, I kept thinking about my father. How lonely he must have been carrying that secret for decades. How much resentment had poisoned our family long before I understood any of it. And strangely, for the first time in my life, I stopped blaming myself for being unloved there. The problem had never been my worth. It was the dysfunction I was born into. That realization changed something inside me permanently. When I landed in Seattle, my assistant Rachel met me outside the office the next morning looking nervous. "You're trending." I blinked. "What?" She handed me her phone. Someone at the funeral reception had uploaded a video. The caption read, "Millionaire family exposed at funeral after secret DNA test revealed." 5 million views. I watched 30 seconds before shutting it off. The video showed Ethan shouting, my mother crying, guests whispering, and one horrifying moment where Ethan screamed, "So Clara was the only real Bennett this entire time?" The comments were brutal. She was treated like garbage for years. Meanwhile, she was the only honest one. The quiet sibling is always the one holding the family together. That grandmother knew everything. Reporters started emailing within hours, podcast requests, interview offers, even documentary inquiries. I rejected all of them. This wasn't entertainment to me. It was grief. 3 days later, Ethan appeared at my office. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked exhausted, wrinkled clothes, dark circles. Like he hadn't slept since the funeral. My receptionist asked if she should send him away. I stared through the glass wall at my younger brother, the golden child, the boy who got everything, and somehow looked more lost than I'd ever seen him. "Send him in." He stepped into my office slowly. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he looked around at the framed magazine covers on my walls. "You really built all this?" I nodded once. He laughed bitterly. "Mom always said you barely got by." "Mom said a lot of things." He sat down heavily. Then came the sentence I never expected to hear from Ethan Bennett. "I think Dad loved you more." I stared at him. He rubbed his face. "All those years, I thought he just hated me sometimes. But now I think he was trying to force himself to love me equally." "That wasn't your fault." "I know." His voice cracked. "But I helped make your life miserable anyway." Silence filled the room. Then he looked at me directly. "Why did Dad tell you instead of me?" "Because you were the center of everyone's world," I almost said. Instead, I answered honestly. "Because he trusted me to handle the truth." That broke him. He started crying quietly right there in my office. And for the first time in our lives, I saw my brother without arrogance, without entitlement, just pain. "I don't know who I am anymore," he whispered. I understood that feeling better than he realized. Because I had spent my entire life rebuilding myself outside our family's version of me. Eventually, Ethan looked up. "Did you hate me?" I thought about it carefully. "No," I said finally. "But I hated who this family turned us into." He nodded slowly. Before leaving, he stopped near the door. "Mom's not doing well." I said nothing. "She keeps saying Dad ruined everything." A bitter laugh escaped me. "No, Ethan, the lies ruined everything." After he left, I sat alone for a long time thinking about how strange grief is. Sometimes you don't mourn the people themselves. You mourn the family you should have had. A week later, my mother called again. This time I answered. Her voice sounded small, fragile. "I'd like to see you." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe near the waterfront. She looked older, not physically, emotionally, like decades of carefully maintained illusion had collapsed all at once. For several minutes, she just stared into her coffee. Then she whispered, "Your father was going to leave me." I blinked. "What?" "He found out about the affair years ago. We stayed together for appearances, but after Rose died, something changed in him." Tears slid down her face. "He said he was tired of pretending." Suddenly, everything made sense. The confession, the documents, the timing. Dad hadn't revealed the truth out of revenge. He revealed it because he was finally done carrying it. "You loved Ethan more," I said quietly. My mother closed her eyes. "Yes, at least she was honest now." "You looked so much like your father," she whispered. "Every time I saw you, I felt guilty." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they hurt, but because they explained everything. I had spent decades believing I was somehow unworthy. Unlovable. Too quiet. Too emotional, too invisible. But none of it was about me. I was simply the living reminder of a truth my mother couldn't escape. "I'm sorry," she whispered. And for the first time in my life, I believed she meant it. Not because forgiveness suddenly fixed everything, but because truth finally entered the room. Months passed after that. Slowly, painfully, our family started reshaping itself around honesty instead of performance. Ethan moved out of Charleston. He left my father's architecture firm, started therapy. Last I heard, he was teaching sailing lessons in Florida while figuring out what kind of life he actually wanted. My mother sold the waterfront house. She said it felt haunted now. Maybe it was. As for me, I kept writing. But something inside my work changed after the funeral. My stories became less about exposing corruption and more about survival, about identity, about the hidden emotional violence that happens inside families who care more about appearances than love. One essay in particular went viral. It was called "The Child Who Learns to Disappear." Thousands of people wrote to me afterward. Sons, daughters, people who spent years believing they were difficult to love simply because their families failed them. That's the thing nobody tells you. Sometimes healing doesn't begin when people finally choose you. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop begging them to. About a year after the funeral, I visited Grandma Rose's grave alone. I brought white lilies, same as the ones I carried the day Ethan threw me out of the chapel. I sat there for almost an hour talking to her quietly, telling her everything that happened, telling her she was right. Truth does matter eventually. Before leaving, I placed my hand against the cold stone and smiled through tears. Because despite all the pain, I finally understood something important. Being rejected by the wrong people can sometimes save your life. If my family had loved me the way I desperately wanted, I might never have built a life beyond them. I might never have learned my own strength. I might never have discovered who I was outside their approval. And maybe that's the strangest part of all this. The child they ignored became the only one capable of surviving the truth. So let me ask you something. Have you ever realized your family misunderstood you completely? What helped you stop chasing their approval? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that being unseen does not mean being unworthy. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who learn to survive without applause. Thank you for being here. And until next time, take care of your heart.